I heard a cool analogy that I wanted to share today. I was listening to the Matthew Hussey podcast. If you haven't ever heard of him, check him out. He's amazing. He was kind of promoting like his book and some stuff that he's doing around grief and heartbreak, because his thing is relationships. But he shared in there parts of an interview that he'd done with a guy called David, I think his name was, who was a grief counsellor or grief expert. And he said he's the only grief expert that has also scientifically studied buffalo, which I thought, okay, that's a bit of a weird, weird thing to raise in a topic about grief. But what he said was that buffalo, when there's a storm approaching, buffalo will actually head towards the storm. And they do that so that they can get it over and done with quicker, right? So if they're trying to run away from the storm, it will prolong what they're going through, prolong the negative experience that they're having, any potential challenges that they might have. By heading directly into the eye of the storm, what they're doing is getting it over and done with quicker. And he kind of likened this to grief, heartbreak, and generally the processing of negative emotions, right? So as humans, we tend to, when we feel negative emotions, we want to avoid it. We abuse substances, we distract ourselves by being too busy, we bury ourselves in work, we bury ourselves in other people's drama and problems. We do everything that we can to avoid actually just sitting with our own pain. And there was also a study that they did on that, where they tried to put people in a room for 15 minutes on their own with nothing to do, no phone, nothing to read, nothing to look at. And people were so uncomfortable with just sitting with their thoughts and their feelings that when they gave them the option of either sitting in a room on their own for 15 minutes or pressing a button that would give them an electric shock, enough of an electric shock for it to not be nice, a lot of people, especially men, would choose giving themselves an electric shock. So when I was listening to all this stuff, and I thought, I really liked that analogy of the buffalo running towards the storm. If we sit with negative, uncomfortable emotions, grief, heartbreak, they're normal feelings to be having when you lose someone, whether you've just broken up a relationship, whether you've just lost a best friend, a colleague, or whether someone's died, whatever it might be, the loss of a future that you thought you had. If you sit with the negative, uncomfortable emotion and sit with it long enough to let it move through your body, like really breathe through it, sit there, identify where the emotion sits in your body. What does it look like? What does it feel like? If it was a color, what color would it be? If it was, is it solid, liquid, or gas? Where in your body does it sit? And sit there and breathe through that. Acknowledge and validate that uncomfortable emotion is there, and breathe and sit through it for as long as you need to process it. By doing that, you're actually processing the emotion. You're not avoiding it. You're not using drugs, alcohol. You're not trying to avoid it, because when you do try and avoid it, all you're doing is repressing it and holding on to it somewhere in your body and in your brain, for it to trigger you later on, for you to feel more uncomfortable for longer. Be like the buffalo, run into the storm, process your feelings as and when they come up. Don't try and run away from the storm, from the negative feelings, because it will come back and bite you in the arse later. And by continually running away from how shit you feel, you're just building up and building up and building up more shit feelings, more trigger points, more shit stuff that's going to happen in the future that's going to trigger you. Be like a buffalo, run into the storm.